Thank you. Welcome back to our joint meeting of House Ways and Means and House Education. And we are continuing hearing from our colleagues on our education system, education finance, with what they're hearing and what their suggestions are. We are welcoming Representative Hank.
Good morning, committees. Representative Lisa Hango, Franklin 5, for the record. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm here today with a very simple message. I represent 3 school districts and 1 supervisory union across my legislative district. And I share those with not only my district mate, but 3 other legislative district representatives. I'm also a school board member in one of those districts. To speak in blanket statements about our region's schools may seem improbable, but in this case, I feel that I represent all of them with my sentiments. If you look at a statewide graph, we are among the lowest spending districts in the state. My district's proposed spending in this budget cycle is $9,900 per student. We continually hold spending increases to a minimum and have not had a budget fail in a very long time. This year, due to the publicized tax projections, our budgets were uniformly defeated. We faced the very hard work of trying to cut budgets that were already near bare bones. Our informational sessions are just beginning as we attempt to educate the public on how close we are to the $1 tax rate, which means that any cuts below that rate will start sending revenue directly to the statewide fund. Our boards looked long and carefully at spending cuts. And even though we had very little left to cut, we made a good faith effort to implement difficult cuts, including those affecting public safety in our schools. I'm here to call for higher spending districts to follow our lead and cut their budgets. With the current statewide formula remaining in place, those high spending districts that continue to spend because they can will cause our property taxes to rise, even as our ability to provide services to students declines. It is imperative for all voters to understand how their spending across the state in all districts affects all taxpayers and ultimately all students. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Representative Lawley.
No, it is. Thank you.
All right. Representative McCoy will be up next. Morning.
Morning. For the record, Representative Patty McCoy, representing Rutland, which is in the western part of Rutland County, representing Pulte, Ira, and a little part of Wells west of Route 30, which is Lake St. Catherine. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. And for the record, I'm going to be channeling former Representative Larry Copley in State 1 School District. Our current student population probably hangs around 75 to 80,000 students statewide, which is pretty much what the city of Providence, Rhode Island has as a student population. I know that we need to increase our student population in this state, but we can't do that because the number 1 reason is housing. So we have a lot of issues to solve in the housing before we can increase the student population. We have issues of lower student teacher ratios in our school. I know in Pulte, when my children went to school, the average class size was 24 to 26 students. Today, it hangs around 12 to 15. And we have not reduced any teachers staff, no teacher staff or individual assist, I don't know what they're calling them now, paraprofessionals. I think we've increased the paraprofessional population in our school district. we need to cap spending. I have no magic wand to tell you that this is it. I have the solution. I do not. There are far more intelligent people working on that, but I do know we somehow need to cap spending. And from my perspective, my district, my supervisory union has done everything that the state has demanded of them, beginning with Act 60, Act 46, Act 173. Our increase in our budget for this year that was passed in March was 1.57%. And then I have to tell these taxpayers that their increase in their property taxes is going to be double digit. When they only increased 1.57%, I cannot ask any more than the school, what that supervisory union did. And yet I have to go back and say, well, because we pool everybody's money and everyone else spent 241 million, you now have to chip in for what when my school district does what's asked of them, they should not be punished because other schools have gone way beyond 18%, 20% increases, and you're penalizing my supervisory union. I do know that what we do, we need to make the decision based on what is best for our children and our students. I'm not an educator. I did the best with my 3 daughters, and they are fine, upstanding members, all went on to higher ed, all have well-paying jobs. I know we need to do that, but I don't know what the solution is. I do know that the current formula is way too complex for any average citizen or even many of us in this room today to even understand. So it needs to be less complicated. And it needs to be, as a school district treasurer and supervisory union treasurer for 26 years, there's a huge disconnect between what happens at a school budget and when people receive their property taxes, because you give the credit right then to individuals. So there's this disconnect when they go, oh, that's not bad. My school taxes aren't bad, because those lower income individuals are receiving that credit immediately on their tax bill. There's a disconnect when they go to the polls when that happens. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. We have Representative Lawler here. Yeah, oh, great. Welcome.
We should have walked over together.
I know, you wore the right shoes. Actually forgot that it had snowed. Big surprise.
Good morning.
Good morning. Let's see, I am just going to read something that I prepared. Seems like the best way to get my points across. So
Just give us an introduction and then.
yeah, so I am Kate Lally. I represent the town of Shelburne. Chittenden 6 is my district. And I wanted to thank you for this opportunity to comment on education financing. So everything that we do in government is shaped by public perceptions around our ability to balance services with affordability for constituents. And the message that I am hearing from my constituents is that we're failing at this. We all recognize that certain students cost more to educate than others and are committed to ensuring a quality education for Vermont students. The revised equalized student formula from Act 127, coupled with desire for districts to retain the services they become accustomed to, must be balanced against the loss of pandemic era funding and the true costs of local control. This has meant no investment in facilities, no accountability for outcomes for the kids in the districts, and significant redundant administration, all in a context where the school population is declining each year, particularly, I believe this is the case in rural Vermont. So as the rollout of equalized student adjustments proceeds, it should be paired with strong incentives to rein in spending statewide. The community schools shared services model is a really important first step towards efficient and more cost-effective delivery of many essential services at scale, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this rolls out. The weighting measures in Act 127 do not take into account cost of living differences across the state. The median housing price in Chittenden County is 60% higher than the statewide median and is 2 to 3 times that of our rural counties. This is playing itself out in what districts need to pay every staff person. So we need a more balanced view of the actual educational cost distribution across the state. We all want equality of opportunity for our kids. Formulas in Act 127 are not reflective of cost realities. In the CVSD district, which is my district staffing costs are approximately 80% of the budget. Driving up salaries for staff are employee shortages as the work in schools becomes more challenging. And in Shelburne, a median home cost is now $734,000, if you can believe that. At the same time, we have rising costs for heat, transportation, and to maintain freight and infrastructure. Shelburne is revising its zoning to encourage lower cost housing by increasing density and balancing cars and transit, but building housing in the quantities needed in our region is going to take time. We already have among the highest cumulative tax rates in the country, so we need to focus as a state on where we see the returns on investment if we're going to ask ever more of our taxpayers. To benchmark what's a sustainable level of statewide spending, to look at outcomes in some other states seems informative. We spend 22% more per student in Vermont than New Hampshire or Maine, and without necessarily better educational outcomes. This is just a brief look at some of the Department of Education, U.S. Department of Education data. This is coming at the time you're spending very near the bottom nationwide in school facilities, which is, we're accumulating an ever larger deficit in this area. So just to wrap up, the dollars that we invest in education are those that we aren't investing in other needs: drug treatment, climate mitigation, affordable housing, walkable and bikeable communities, and other worthy investments. So when we look at ed spending reform, I think it needs to be undertaken in the context of balancing it against these other pressing needs. And I'm done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Burroughs. Fine.
Oh, you were right in my blind spot, sorry.
Morning, welcome.
Good morning. Say. For the record, my name is Elizabeth Burroughs and I represent Windsor One, which is composed of Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor. And for full disclosure, I am a 10+ year member of our local school board, Mount Escutney School Board, which I have been on since it was a 3-member board of West Windsor only. And I want to start by thanking you all for the opportunity to talk with you this morning. I have had this opportunity burning inside of me since January 10th. Oh, thank you for allowing me to finally speak. What successful business model includes the requirement to annually deplete treasure from its base investment into a blind entity with zero accountability for use of funds, success, treatment of employees, quality of output, or adherence to law? In what successful business
does that happen to the sheer and sometimes total detriment of the accountable entities, which are cannibalized in service to the blind entity? But education is not a business and should not be treated as one. I will start by stating the obvious, that we must restructure our education system and support the education committee's decisions and actions with the ways and the means. This, this must include a full examination of our tuitioning structure. It must. It is perverse that in districts with small schools all across our state this year, painful decisions are being made, even with an eye towards closure, to starve the beast with cuts staff programming, sapping a common good in favor of supporting entities with zero accountability, with zero accountability in budgeting or in quality or in treatment of the town's most promising investment. It's perverse. But speaking of promising investments, I beg you to call for an economic analysis of the real long-term state impact of school closures. Setting aside any immediate savings of the first 5 years, please consider the impact over 20 to 30 years to the state's taxing capacity when a town dies as a result of school closure. When services die out because the town has converted to minority homesteaders, it affects our taxing capability. When second homeowners convert to retirees for whom services cannot be provided. When people move out of our state instead of in because young families don't want to move to a state that has diminished its public school system. When students who don't go to school in their own towns statistically wind up costing the state in support services as adults. All of these details have real economic impact on our whole state. Right now, at this moment, the means of funding education is regressive. When towns like Heartland, which had a more than 30% rise in property taxes this year, and a budget that just passed by 9 votes. When towns like Heartland have 5 expensive home purchases take place in the year of valuation, it skews the grand list upwards. The CLA is supposed to create equity, but it is not currently functioning properly. In a housing market such as the one we are in, it is regressive. It is regressive for the grand list to become skewed, and it's regressive for modest homes to become skewed in their valuation as an equal result. One of my suggestions is to offset the CLA for this year and next with an end date certain by adding another portion of the property transfer tax, because that is directly related to the cause of the problem, the current problem. Another idea is to look closely at the CLA formula to consider annual sales, in a way that removes the highest and lowest outliers. Likewise, and this is input from several constituents, rejiggering the common use formula to include a different tier for out-of-state owners who've been buying up large tracts of land would provide a small but meaningful relief. And also from a number of constituents, adjusting income sensitivity to be in line with our current economic conditions would also provide another small but meaningful modicum of relief. And I've also heard from a number of constituents, both as a representative and as a school board member, people would like to be able to understand exactly where their taxes are going. So I already talked about transparency as far as where tuition funds are going and whether they're actually, what they're funding and whether they're funding quality. But they've also asked to offload non-educational expenditures like mental health, which has been, all these have been already mentioned, but offloading expenditures such as mental health, teacher healthcare costs, since they're negotiated by the governor, social work, universal school meals, and enrollment. This would make it clear to school boards what element of their budget process they're actually able to address, and it would make it clear to taxpayers feeling the pain of increases, what they're paying for. Along,
We're at 6 minutes, FYI.
oh, we are? We have about another minute and a half left, is that all right?
Quickly, yeah.
Okay. Okay, same money, same adherence to accountability. One of the greatest public goods has been purposefully weakened, but, and this is important, we have everything we need to fix it. We do, we just need the time and space to be able to gather input and wisdom, and importantly, courage. With the right administrative leader who has experience in working to draw down federal funding, adhere to federal and state law, and work to fix a system instead of replacing it, driven by fairness, quality, and equitable outcomes, and apolitical as all of education should be. We have the inputs and creativity we really need to fix what we have. Using the probing equity questions provided by the Social Equity Caucus in the last 2 years, we can ask ourselves whether every student is being treated fairly and getting what they need. We can stop discounting or overlooking districts where human rights and dignity are trampled. We can be courageous and look right at the problem and fix it. One of the reasons I have loved serving on the board for more than a decade is that education is one of the very few remaining areas of public life that is theoretically apolitical. All across our great nation, we see people of all parties working collaboratively and creatively to shore up our greatest asset and investment in our collective future. When I started work at our local school board, I had no idea of the political affiliation of my colleagues. We all had hands on the same rock. We can get back there. We can purposefully set aside our politics and remember that our job is to protect and foster the greatness of every child in our care.
Thank you very much. Representative Arsenault, you are up next. Welcome.
Hi, Ellen. I have not found this, so let's see quickly. Thank you, everyone. For the record, Angela Arsenault, representative from Williston. So I first want to say that proud graduate of Vermont Public Schools. My experience as a student both in the North Country and Randolph school systems is part of the reason I knew that no matter where I went after high school, I would eventually come back to Vermont so that my kids could go to school here. Whether it was the multi-grade primary unit class I was in from 1st through 3rd grade, the incredible dance program at North Country, and one of my favorite educational experiences of all time, senior project at Randolph Union High School. Even as a kid, it was clear to me that good things were happening in Vermont Public Schools. That brand of magic is still happening in schools throughout our state, despite the fact that our system and many of the people who make up that system are in crisis. I have experienced this current crisis from a somewhat interesting, though not altogether unique perspective, that of legislator and school board member. I know how it feels when a school board spends years planning for a gigantic shift in education funding, only to have the legislation changed, not at the last minute, but in fact, after you've already warned your budget. Over the years, I've been in multiple meetings where folks are blaming Montpelier for the unsustainable increase in taxes, or the bungled rollout of e-finance and Act 173, the absolute mess of a switch to a new statewide assessment, the mandated change to proficiency-based education without the necessary supports. The list goes on and on. So many decisions made in rooms like this one, having such significant effects on the people inside our schools and the volunteer school boards working to support them. Because of this perspective, I must borrow from the Hippocratic Oath and impress upon us all the intense need to first do no harm. Please do not think about making the important and necessary changes ahead without a clear understanding of who and what will be impacted. And please do not simply rely on past experience or the Agency of Education or tax modeling to predict that impact. Talk to the people who will feel the changes most immediately, our students, caregivers, teachers, administrators, support staff, school counselors, and our taxpayers. These voices together can help us re-envision a statewide educational system that starts with a dream for every student in Vermont. Once we have a handle on that dream, we can figure out how to fund it. It cannot happen the other way around. We must lead with education policy and let the funding formula follow. Speaking of that formula, whatever happens next, we need it to be more transparent. In our laudable and constitutionally mandated efforts to be super, super equitable, we have created an educational funding system that is so opaque as to be deceptive. Nobody is trying to be untruthful, but when we work so hard to hide the fact that some districts pay more into the system than they spend, there is virtually no connection between an individual taxpayer, their tax rate, and an understanding of what their money funds. Similarly, we've severed the connection between districts, their spending, and the resulting tax rates in their respective towns. This is evidenced by our school district, Champlain Valley. Our second warned budget, because our original budget failed, represents a 5.8 increase in spending from FY24, well below the statewide average. Yet our tax rates are estimated to increase between 10 and 18% across our 5 towns. Our failed budget required tax rate increases between 21 and 30%. Reducing the tax rate increases required our administrators to cut 42 full-time equivalent positions. 42 positions. And I'll note that we now face a potential second failed budget because our community members are so upset about the cuts that are being proposed. School districts are in an impossible situation. We've also created a system that allows such incredible leakage of taxpayer dollars that we've essentially lost track of what's coming out of the education fund. How many taxpayers know that their money goes to independent schools, some of which discriminate against students of various backgrounds? How many Vermonters understand that school districts are paying for a number of social services, most notably mental health services for students? At a recent school board meeting, our district superintendent shared a quote that feels particularly relevant to this conversation. Economist and composer W. Edwards Deming said that every system produces the outcome that it was designed to produce. Our current funding system was designed to be confusing, and it is. That has to change. So what can we do in the near term to clear up some of this confusion and provide immediate relief to taxpayers? I understand the cloud tax is currently written into the yield bill, and I think that will help if it's sustainable. But please don't buy down the tax rate as we have in the past couple of years. Artificially suppressing tax rates contributed to the massive tax rate increase that helped defeat dozens of school budgets this year. And to that point, we need to have a plan for districts that don't pass a budget. I don't presume to know where the help could come from, but I do know that school districts have cut and cut and cut, and third attempts to pass a budget will have disastrous impacts on students. We need to plan for something better than the statutorily allowed loan of 87% of a district's most recently passed budget. Finally, about the yield. It makes no sense that we ask voters to vote on a best guess tax rate. We can make changes on timing that will again increase transparency and make clear for voters that every district's budget impacts the entire state. I acknowledge I haven't offered a lot of solutions here. My overarching and deeply held belief is that we will likely have to ride out this disaster for FY25, learn all that we can and make small changes to provide some relief in FY26, then celebrate a beautiful, new, cohesive statewide vision for education and education funding in FY27. One that takes into account the problematic nature of Vermont's parallel systems of public and private institutions. One that embraces the notion of same dollars, same rules. One that acknowledges that numbers do not always tell the full story of need. And one that centers student opportunities and achievement. A statewide system that points all schools and districts toward a set of common goals that best utilize available resources. With your leadership and the magic of Vermont Public Schools, I truly believe we can get there.
Very much. Yeah, that's right, the screen.
Oh, is that the computer?
Representative Stebbins, you're up. Representative Stebbins, can you hear us? There we go. Welcome.
Thank you. Sorry, I was not hearing anything. I can begin.
Yes.
Thank you all so much for the opportunity to speak today. For the record, I'm Gabrielle Stebbins and I represent Chittenden 13, or the South End area of Burlington. For context, I have a 14-year-old and a 6-year-old currently in the public school system. While my 14-year-old has no special needs, my 6-year-old has needed additional support and is on an IEP as a result of being deaf due to having not identified the need for tubes from when she was 14 months to 22 months old. I witnessed firsthand the stressors placed on our public school system writ large, and as they relate to the city of Burlington specifically. I implore you to take this moment of crisis regarding how we pay for education, and in particular public education, and slow down, step back, and collect as much data and intel as possible. We have a phenomenal opportunity to respond to this challenge in a strategic, comprehensive way. Thus, I encourage you to focus on the systems work that really needs to occur. Lead with systems and then follow up with funding. Ideally, I would love to see the Education Committee be able to really focus on policy, identify what's working, what's not, take the input from experts and the many, many reports that we've had over the last 10 years to identify the following. What is the size of the system? What are our estimated demographics moving forward? How many buildings do we have? How many people? Has consolidation resulted in reduced costs? Is it an opportunity to move forward? For the Agency of Education, we know that the nonpartisan National Association of State Board of Education based in DC actually recommends that the governance structure for education not be located within the executive branch. Before Governor Shumlin, it was located outside. So let's actually step back, take a look. Does that make sense to revisit where AOE is located? What is the leadership? What is its scope? And is the role of that scope well defined? Are they able to provide it? Is it adequately funded and staffed? I do think we really need to look at designation and tuitioning. What are we looking at in terms of the same dollars, the same rules? Financial oversight of independent schools, from what I understand, and I don't have any children in independent schools, it's relatively absent. Privatization and operating a dual system does contribute to financial losses. And I want to just call out, as someone who's had siblings with dyslexia and learning disabilities, sending my brother and sister to private school was critical for my parents. But we do need to focus on making sure that we respond adequately with the appropriate funding for public education first. What is it that schools are currently being asked to do that could really be considered social services and perhaps be funded as such? And what can we do outside of our education domain that can really reduce some of the challenges that our public schools are facing? I can't tell you the number of times my daughter comes home and she talks about the kids who, beat up other kids outside of her school, the fact that she doesn't want to go into the bathroom because of the vaping. These are things, or the social media and the relation to depression. These are the things that collectively, and I'm so grateful that you have a joint session right now. Collectively, I know that the folks on the Education Committee and so many experts outside of our building at the State House, they are very fully aware of all of these challenges. How do we make sure we're really funding education and education needs with our education dollars, and other funding sources that address mental health, other issues should be funded separately? I know you've heard this already. The CLA mechanism designed to ensure equitable property tax rates across the state, it has inadvertently contributed to significant disparities in education funding. And so really revisiting that, I'm grateful to Act 127 and the fact that it really did focus on addressing weighting. This is huge. It's been 20 plus years. Please, let's focus on how we make sure that we are actually meeting the challenges at need. It's also critical to emphasize that the transition relief provided to districts that have been historically overweighted could be considered, at least in my district, to exceed what should reasonably be required. So revisiting that and stepping back, I understand how challenging it is having friends and family in other districts where they're seeing, losses of potential funding. But this is, again, going back to big picture, what are the systems challenges we need to focus on? In terms of healthcare, as a very short-term fix, looking at the miscellaneous education bill, we could actually look at the requirement to assess cost containment for healthcare required costs. And in school construction, there's definitely an urgent need to consider the implications of school construction costs, particularly for districts like mine. Again, I'm really focused on what can we do for all of Vermont. But I would be remiss if I did not just highlight that this is clearly an issue across the state, and trying to figure out how to make it as equitable across the state is necessary. And with that, I'll close off. I do have other comments, but I'm not sure if I'm at 6 minutes.
You're at exactly 6 minutes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Okay, Representative Morgan, welcome.
Very good. Good morning, committees,
Good morning.
chairs. Thank you for having me. Mine's very brief. It won't take 6 minutes. I'll start off with, I'm not the expert. I don't have the answers, like several others I've heard say. So I'm simply here to send a message from my constituents is the biggie. First, from a couple of my school boards, and I know there's a couple there, these things have probably been brought up to you already, but I'm probably going to be a bit of a broken record. But I know in the state system for healthcare for educators, we do have a program in place, but I know that every system can use improvement. And the school boards, a couple of school boards asked me to just bring that forward, that are we looking at potentially improving that system as a cost savings measure, coupled with, and again, probably a broken record, but statewide teachers contract. Is there, move afoot or an appetite to look at that on behalf of taxpayers? Does that help level the playing field a bit on these budgets, so that, because as we all know, those eat up a very good chunk of your school budgets, and does that assist us? So they asked if I would pass it on. Again, it's probably been said, but I wanted to state it on their behalf. So really what I'm here to say, though, is here's my ask or my message. As probably many of you have had over the last several months, especially when the budget numbers came out on school budgets, with the very high numbers, one of my towns in the 35% range, is my phone, texting, face-to-face conversations innumerable, and people are saying we're hurting. So I have 6 towns I represent, all of Grand Isle County and the town of Milton. I'm a selectman in the town of Milton. We busted our backsides to hold the line on our town budget this year, knowing especially the fact that the school was going to be hurting. And we did, and that got passed. And actually, I think it's a sign of the times, though, because it didn't pass by what I thought it would, with it only being less than a 3% increase. I think people were fearful in general when they saw the education numbers coupled with that. So I kind of felt very lucky to be a selectman versus a school board member, because they had not an enviable task in front of them presenting these budgets to everybody this year. So the message I'm here to bring from my constituents is, let's do something this session, even if it's this big, if it's ready to vote by marching out with their boots, heading out of town. We need them here. We need their revenue. We need their tax base. We need them. We want them to stay Vermonters. We want to keep them here. But they look at the bottom line because they have to. That's how they make their existence, how they make their living. One of them especially I'd say is very capable of folding up their tent and going away and will be fine financially, but feels that they offer a service to the community they want to keep offering. And so I applaud them for that. I hope they stay. I hope we can keep it so that they do stay. So again, I don't need the 6 minutes, but I don't have the answers. I'm not the smartest person in the room in this world, but I know that I've not promised them because I can't promise them, but I said that I would bring forward the fact that let's do something for them to give them a sign. I don't know if that is crazy to y'all, and I'm not trying to sound alarmist. I'm just being, I think, a realist of what I'm seeing out there. And yeah, I'll just leave it right there. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much. So did I. Should we
Take
Take
a quick
five?
break. Yeah.
let's take 5 minutes and hopefully our final speaker will be coming at that point.